I was born in Summerland 1 year prior to Ken. Ken is my brother. And I was born in 1950, and I was born in the little Summerland Hospital, which is non-existent at this point in time.
And as Connie said, I was born a year later, almost exactly a year later. And I was born in the same hospital, which at that time was Summerland's 4th hospital. And it was abandoned, and a new hospital was built, and then it disappeared in a fire. So my birthplace is no longer there.
But we're here out of a family of 4. There are 3 boys and myself, and our parents met here. My mother went to school here and her education here, and then Penticton, and then Vancouver. And she met my father. So my mother had Irish roots and my father had French roots. So they were quite a combination. And they came back to settle in Summerland, and because they had family here and grandparents, and this, where we are now in these gardens, was our grandparents' home. And my mother grew up here in these gardens. And it was literally a home. It was a massive community, 100 different buildings at least. Very few of them still exist in their original position. Some are kept as heritage. For example, the old superintendent's home on the property. And initially, to speak of my grandparents, they came from Ireland in 1927 on their honeymoon. They married in March, and they had a very rough trip over the Atlantic, and then picked up a train and traveled across Canada by train, and arrived in the Okanagan by paddle wheel coming down the lake, and were met by an older brother of my grandfather's who was already hired by the federal government to work here at these, it was called the Experimental Station at the time. Mm-hmm. And when they arrived, they only planned to be here for 2 years. But guess what happened in 1929?
Ah, yes.
Market crashed, and so their funds weren't going to go too far, and they never did get back to Ireland, and they ended up staying here and making their home here. And here we are.
At that time, it was quite a community, although there were only 5 residences here. Not counting the boarding house. But there were 5 residences here, so there were 5 families located in those homes. And our grandparents had one of them, which was the head gardener's cottage. So Connie and I, as children, spent a good deal of time up here visiting with grandparents because both parents are working, and so we had a real opportunity to spend an awful lot of time here.
I can remember I must have been about 4 years old, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and Nat May was a very early morning person. He'd be up at 4 working, and he had greenhouses, and very large greenhouses, and some of them had to be kept heated as well, so he'd be up to continue that going. But he would go down and work in these greenhouses and set the watering systems up and walk through. So lots of times I'd hear him and I'd sneak out with him because my grandmother was not a morning person and she didn't realize I was gone most of the time. And I would go with him, so away we'd go. And he also had a drip system under some of his trays in the greenhouses. Remember that?
Yeah.
And he grew mushrooms underneath. Now, every day, every morning, we go home with mushrooms. And we have fried mushrooms with our breakfast. Now, that sounds like a very unusual breakfast, but to this day, I love fried mushrooms.
Yeah, that was remembrances of the greenhouses. Like a number of years ago, at home, I had a greenhouse, a 28-foot greenhouse. So a pretty substantial size for a residential property. And it had 3 sections. 2 ends were wood frame greenhouse, and in the middle was an aluminum frame greenhouse. Well, we had a grandchild, and with our first grandchild being born, we thought we need the space in the yard because the rest of it's all garden. And so we need a little bit of lawn in the back so he can run around or whatever as soon as he can walk. So I got rid of the greenhouse, and actually I sold it to her. And
Shared greenhouses.
one of my biggest regrets was getting rid of the greenhouse, because I loved it. I mean, because as soon as I'd go out there in the morning and open one door and walk into the greenhouse, and just the smell, it just reminded me of going in my grandfather's greenhouses all the time.
Yeah.
Just that humid, earthy plant smell. I mean, it was just fantastic. So regrettably, I don't have a greenhouse anymore. Yeah, some great memories as a child. Like I say, I mean, what a yard to have.
Their whole
You know.
backyard.
And it was not our playground was not just limited to the gardens area here. You had, another 300 plus acres to roam around on, although we were always warned about crossing the tracks, going across
yeah.
the tracks where the bulls.
There were big bull pens.
Yeah, the big bull pens were
Jersey
over there.
bulls.
In front of our grandparents' cottage, there was kind of a rolling, kind of a hill. It dropped off fairly quickly, and it went down to a lower level, which is principally where my grandfather's greenhouses were. But there was a very large willow tree there, and the willow tree was, I don't know how old, but a very, very old willow tree. And we'd go running across the grass, jump out, grab the vines on the willow, and swing out over the bank, swing back in, and that was always a good time. Up the hill.
Except one winter we were coming up the hill, and that hill was very slippery in the winter. And I remember my mom telling a story, because I don't remember any of it. She turned around and realized I was not in the back seat, and this was before seat belts, and I wasn't very old. Here's Ken leaning across the whole seat trying to close this big heavy door on this old Dodge or something, this old car, which you could never have done. But I was not there. Where's Connie? So they had to stop the car, and they went running back down the hill. And all up the hill, they had little piles of sand for people to put on the road because it was so icy. Well, I had fallen out and rolled, and I landed in a pile of sand. So they retrieved me from that, and my grandmother kept me in bed on nearly the whole visit because she was so worried I was going to have a concussion or something. But I still remember that, lying in the sand and thinking, how did I ever get here, And everybody looking down at me, and I wasn't very old. But that was nice of you to try and save me, though.
Yeah.
I didn't know he was closing the door and not tell anybody. Because I was in a baby boomer bust kind of thing, way too many students for Summerland schools. So when I went into grade 7, they had nowhere to put us. So they, what are we going to do with all these grade 7s? So they took huge apple bins.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And they piled apple bins up and created classrooms inside an auditorium. And so we were in these classrooms of apple bins, and no kidding, you thought, they were 3 high, if I remember. 3 high, I think, to create a wall. So what would that be, 12 feet?
About, yeah,
But you
just short
can
of 12.
imagine, you're sitting there and thinking, is that apple bin going to come down on me? Or because, but they had it set up really quite well. So our classes were held in an auditorium in apple bins. We were rather unique. I
Yeah,
think.
I'd almost forgotten about that.
Yeah. So that was my greatest safety hazard, getting squashed by an apple bin.
Yeah, and because of the overcrowding,
Yeah.
when Connie was in grade 7, they moved to the secondary school, the grade 7s. I was just a year behind, and we stayed in the elementary school for grade 7 because they needed some separation for the spacing. And so that was a big disappointment at the time. It was like, what do you mean I can't go to the big school? But yeah, big, well, for Summerland, I think all through the 50s, the schools, they were big classes. They were, because there'd been quite the baby boom.
Yeah.
And you know, everybody had 3, 4, 5 kids in their family. I mean, it was just, there weren't very many single child families. But
They were very involved. They were both, well, Mom was instrumental in trying to get things organized to get a museum going in Summerland. And my dad and Mom both together were very involved in singers and players. And they loved live theater and drama. And my dad loved to act.
and music.
And, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Pirates of Penzance, I remember them performing it. And we're here's our 4 kids, bing, 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 and siblings, and we're all sitting there, and we get to watch all this, right? Or hear them practicing at home. Or my mom was a self-taught pianist, and she loved to play the piano or the organ or anything like that. So they were always involved in all kinds of things, musical parades in Summerland, musical dramas. What else? They just very much, and they also were involved in the Baptist church in Summerland. They were married in the Baptist church, and often they would have great big picnics every summer. They called it the Sunday school picnic, and you've probably seen pictures of those in the museum. But up on this big lawn, they'd have the big picnics, and those were really quite memorable as well. There was a log cabin, 6-sided log cabin there that had walls this thick. It was so insulated that they could have big tubs of ice cream in there that would stay hard while the picnic was going on, and then afterwards they'd serve everybody ice cold lemonade and ice cream cones at the picnic. And I can remember things like my mom swinging a sledgehammer, knocking big spikes into logs when the women had a contest. I mean, they had some really fun things going on for both adults and kids, and it was just one big happy family having big picnics. Mom was an instigator and a mover and a shaker.
Yeah.
She could get a lot done, and I give her credit for that. She's just
A very good storyteller, a very good public speaker.
yes.
A very popular choice for funeral services and whatnot in speaking to the group about so-and-so or whatever. People were always interested in what Mom's memories of that particular individual were.
Mother's Day, I think 3 years ago it was, we brought Mom up in a wheelchair and brought her up here. And it was her biggest thrill to be up here in the gardens on Mother's Day. And she's fully blind, so she can't see it at all. But she had a sense of where she was and thoroughly enjoyed just being here. And we haven't had the opportunity to do that again because she's not mobile any longer at all. So that was pretty special, that Mother's Day 3 years ago. Both of us serve on the board of directors for the Ornamental Gardens, and we've also worked here prior to that as a volunteer. So I think I haven't been here that long. I think 2011 I started digging in the dirt, and it was a really sort of a moving time for me when I first got up here, because I realized I'm working in the same soil that my grandfather worked in 70 years ago. You know, it just sort of blew me away a little bit when I really thought about it. It was very emotional as well to think that. So, you know, every little piece of dust was here, you know, just, and we've added more to it. But it's quite a great experience. And then also too, I love to share my enthusiasm with new volunteers. And my favorite thing to do with new volunteers up here is to do a walkabout orientation. And we will do a walkabout, and I have been on a 2.5-hour walkabout with some volunteers who do not want it to end. And it's wonderful to hear their questions and their remarks. And a lot of these people are not local. They're new people coming in, and they really want to know, well, what? Really? How did that happen? You know, those kinds of things. And then they're right here, and they're working in the dirt alongside of us now, so it's great.
1.5.
In 2016, we celebrated 100th birthday up here for the gardens. And the May family, from my grandfather's side of the family, we set up a special tent and had a special little area for children, and had it all set up where they actually did plantings. And our grandchildren and our cousins and relatives came to meet. And they all took turns working in this area and working and helping kids plant. And it was a huge hit. And we have some wonderful pictures of family members and grandkids and whatnot playing in the dirt and sharing, and they're all wearing the matching t-shirts as volunteers up here and demonstrating, what they need to do with their plants. So it was a really good experience, and it's quite memorable because my granddaughter's 13 now, so that she would have been 9 or something, 8, 9, when she was the oldest participating, and the other kids were younger, 7, 6, 5, that kind of thing. And it's big in her brain. Like, she remembers that, and she really loved that kind of thing. And they have a little garden in their place, the kids are interested in that too, so I'm really glad to see that. They love to play in the dirt, they love to see what comes out of the dirt, they love to so they've got that bug as well, so I'm glad to see it. They just need to pass it on. I poured many years into the fall fair, for sure, because I absolutely loved that whole sense of community. And my grandparents were involved in the fall fair. My parents were involved in the fall fair. My grandparents, he was a judge of all the flower sections. He had trophies. He was very much a very active part of the fall fair, and so we sort of followed through on that route and sort of carried the torch there for a while. It was a really good experience.
And actually, and our grandfather too. He was a many years a judge at the Interior Provincial
in Armstrong
exhibition in Armstrong.
That's right.
And those were good memories. Going to the Armstrong Fair with our grandparents.
Leaving Summerland to go to the Armstrong Fair was
this is a major trip.
Adventure, major.
Yeah. This is like going to Europe or something, this is, wow, Armstrong, holy smokes.
Get in a little old car.
Let me find it on a map. But, no, going up there and taking in, and the Armstrong Fair, I don't know if you've ever had any experience with it was huge, massive huge. I mean, it rivaled the PNE for the Pacific National Exhibition for the agricultural side of it.
Yeah.
You had all sorts of dairy and various kinds of cattle and sheep and
horse shows.
But what a great experience going up there, getting to stay in a hotel, like a funny little hotel too, like a very strange little place, but whatever, that's what they had. And we'd go up there, as I say, my grandfather was a judge of flowers and whatnot up there for many years, and always had an involvement throughout the valley in all the horticultural associations and the garden groups and whatnot. But another example of the sort of community engagement you had at that time, because it was principally attended by locals. I mean, it was not like some sort of a valley-wide thing, or I extend the local term to Penticton, perhaps, maybe West Bench.
It's funny, every once in a while, my husband and I ran the grade 5 gardening contest for years, and we would go into the schools and sort of talk about what this was about, and if any of the children were interested, then they'd have a consent, and then we'd receive the consent forms, and then they'd have a package delivered to them at the school with their name on it, and we'd have all their seeds and instructions and everything in it. And their parents had registered and given permission for us to be able to visit them in their garden, that kind of thing. So we would make sometimes 3 to 4 visits at least to their gardens and get to know these kids. But the most interesting part about the program, the kids were learning, but you would not believe how many adults, the parents would be out there in the evening with us, and they're asking us, well, what about this and what about that? And all of a sudden the kids wandered off, and here the parents are wanting to know about their gardens. So it was really a real opportunity to get out in the community and talk about their gardens and pass on the information. And I still run into people now who talk about, they remember the grade 5 gardening contest, or it's really it's rewarding in a way. If you think, okay, it wasn't for nothing, it was well worth it. And I really, really enjoyed doing that. And so did my husband. Well, he's a teacher, so it was an automatic for him. I'm not the teacher. So, yeah, it went really, really well. And it was a very big success, and it had run for years. And it's interesting. My husband had won the grade 5 gardening contest when he was in grade 5. And one of the big sponsors, Tom Kinvig, he won the grade 5 gardening contest when he was in grade 5. Now this, I'm in my 70s, and these people, and then our son came along, and guess what? He won it when he was in grade 5. And so it's sort of interesting. You look back through the history. Lots of people in the community who could say, "Oh yeah, I remember the grade 5 gardening contest." But yeah, there's been lots of opportunities to be involved in the communities from so many different directions. I feel very, very privileged to have been living in Summerland most of my life and to have the exposure. And I realize I feel like a little, a little moat, in all the global scene. But here I am doing my part. So I feel very peaceful and settled about that.
No, it's really remarkable. I served on Summerland's municipal council for 18 years, and at the regional district for 15 years. And I was assigned one day. The mayor asked, he asked me if I would mind going to I think it was 104th birthday party. I think 104th birthday party at one of the care homes in Summerland. And I said, yeah, sure, just go and convey birthday greetings and wishes from the district. And so I went, and I'm standing there in the lobby with a number of other guests that have been invited for this thing. And this woman comes down in the elevator, and she's walking. She's got a cane, but she has a nurse just touching her elbow on the other side, and she comes walking down and she's saying, "Oh, hello, hello," and back and forth, back and forth. She gets up to me, and I've recognized who she is. It's a neighbor from when I was a child. And she comes and she stops and she looks at me and she says, "Oh, Ken," she said, "I'm so glad you're here." I probably hadn't seen this woman in I don't know how many years. Probably 40 years. I mean, a very, very long time. And so she turns to the nurse and she says, "I'd like Ken seated on my right." And the nurse is going, actually, we've got little place cards out and everything's set up in there. And she said, "It's my birthday." She said, "I'd like Ken seated on my right." So that's where I sat. And this woman, she didn't miss a beat. I mean, she was, like I say, I mean, she just recognized me right off the bat. And she talked about, "Oh, yeah," she said, "I can remember you coming into the jewelry store all the time and buying those expensive teacups for your mother, And I said, yeah. I got into a bad habit of buying my mother teacups for birthdays, Mother's Day, any special day that came along. I'll buy Mom a teacup.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of community that it was, that somebody that you haven't seen in 40 years, who is, 50 years younger, recognizes you in an instant. Just remarkable. Looking around downtown, and I don't know whether you would have noticed this, but looking around downtown, all of the downtown gardens and hanging plants and trees and whatnot, I give a big shout out to the local crew. I think Susie Kedge heads it up, and they look fabulous this year. You know, all their plantings, entries to town, it looks amazing, and maybe it's not just me. Maybe they are
No, I
actually
think
that
people
much
do
better.
take pride.
Yeah.
They take pride in what they're seeing. Yeah. They do. I do.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say get involved. Just, you know.
Give. And just keep giving. Because when you give, it comes back to you. It really does.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember giving by living.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's and certainly giving while living. I think legacies are great, but I think giving while living is even more rewarding. You can see the results. You know what's happening.
Can't you tell that we agree on a lot of things?